To the first regulatory committee since May the 6th. As we are mostly strangers to each other, I thought it might be a good idea if we introduced ourselves, starting with the officers. And I just want to make the point that the acoustics aren't great in this room, so may I ask that everyone speaks as clearly as possible. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Good morning, my name is David Good. I'm Public Rights of Way Manager.
Good morning everyone, I'm Hannah Barron and I'm working for that safety with the National Officer.
Morning everyone, my name is Jane Elliott and I work in planning and environment and public rights of way team as a definitive map officer under the watchful guidance of David. Morning everybody, I'm Vivian and I work as definitive health in the Executive Department.
Morning everybody, I'm Councillor Ray Park from behind them.
Good morning, I'm Stephanie Lee and I'm a solicitor in the legal department and I'm just here to observe today.
Good morning, Joanne Hanson.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Anne Eaton from Rossendale South and I do hope people will speak up because when you're down in the corner like Davey, you don't always hear everything and that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mike Goldthorpe. I'm the County Councillor of Endell Rural Division.
Good morning, my name is Sue Whitton. I'm the County Councillor for Preston Rural.
Thank you.
Terry Alden, Scammerdale Central.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Jackie Oates, Rossendale East.
Thank you.
Carol Hayes on Bay from the Great Harbour District, Alton Planning Division.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm County Councillor Matthew Salter. I'm covering Wyre Rural Central.
Thank you. County Councillor Hind representing Clitheroe. Agenda item 1. Oh, sorry. I do beg your pardon.
Penwitham has just been annexed.
On my right.
David Howarth, Penwitham West.
Thank you.
And John Burrows of Penwitham East and Walton Dale.
Apologies to you too. I'm so sorry.
Hi.
Agenda item number 1. Do we have apologies?
Councillor Park.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2. The appointment is noted by the County Council on the 27th of May 2021 of County Councillors S. Hind and M. Salter as Chair and Deputy Chair of the Committee, respectively, for 2021-22. Item number 3, the Constitution, membership, terms of reference and programme of meetings for the Regulatory Committee is noted, and I hope you've all diarised the dates for future meetings. Thank you. I have to ask whether there's anyone that has a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any of the matters before us this morning. No. Thank you. Item number 5, minutes of the last meeting held on the 10th of March. I need someone to propose these who was present on the 10th of March, please.
Move those, Chair. I think Terry's going to have to second them.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll ask you to sign them later. Item number 6. We note that we have been given guidance on the law relating to the continuous review of the definitive map and statement of public rights of way and certain orders to be made under the Highways Act 1980. It has been pointed out to us that only Annex A gives the relevant legal guidance that we actually need today, and that can be found on page 13 to 23. Item number 7, progress report on previous committee items. A previous committee asked for an update on progress on matters that they have dealt with, and that has resulted in this quite complicated but quite short document here that David is going to expand on. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this rather daunting list is the list of current definitive map investigations, reports that have been brought to this committee previously, reports that are in preparation or waiting to be prepared to be brought to this committee, and in particular, the previous committee had asked for an update on where the orders that they had made the decision to be made, where they were up to, whether they were happening on the ground, whether they were still in the process, and so on. And these are laid out in the papers here at the different stages. Now, one thing you might look at and think, why on earth are there things that are being dealt with that an application, for instance, 1986, that's a long time ago, why haven't we dealt with it yet? Which would be quite a reasonable question to ask. The answer is that we don't take them strictly in chronological order. A lot of practical reasons why not, but in particular, that example, which is on page 37, it's one where people are walking up and down in large numbers all the time. There's not an urgency to get it on the map when people know about it and are using it. There are other ones that have particular effects on either landowners or the public because something has happened and there's people wanting to use the path, or landowners that are having a problem because of trespass, and something needs regularising for practical reasons, and those get prioritised. And so there is a long list. Yes, we recognise that, and we are working through particularly quickly at the moment. We're getting applications in large numbers at the moment because of the legislation that brings a cut-off date, 2026, for which a lot of these applications can be made. And so there's a rush to get them in before 2026. So we've got a lot on our books. The officers here are working hard to get through them, and then we bring them to you to work hard during these meetings to make the decisions on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. I'm sure there might be one or two questions or queries from members. Yes, Councillor Google. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. To what effect has the lockdown we've had over the last 15 months or so, and the COVID pandemic generally affected the turnout rate of items on this list?
That's a good question, because it has had an effect. It's had an effect that there's a greater awareness amongst the public of the importance of right of way. It's also had an effect in that, particularly earlier on, 15 months ago, when people were suddenly not able to go out so much, they were able to particularly with such a lot of information online, they were able to do the research for routes that they had been perhaps thinking of doing the research on and haven't got around to. Suddenly some people found they've got a lot of time on their hands and were able to then do it. So that, combined with the pressure of the cut-off date, has meant that there's been a great increase in the number of applications. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Any other questions? Right, we'll move on then. Thank you. Actually, as a point of interest, if you turn to page 38 on agenda item 7, you can see 3 items that we're dealing with today under the title of Definitive Map Modification Order, Applications Awaiting Committee Reports. Well, these 3 are having their committee reports seen to today: Aspen Lane, Lord's Lot Road and Twistmore Lane. So it just proves that the system is working. Thank you. Item number 8, we come to the first matter, where it's the application for the addition of a bridal way along Lord's Lot Road over Kellet in Lancaster. And I like to point out to especially the new members that the committee plans relating to this application route are on pages 115, 117 and 119. Now I'm now going to hand over to Jane, who will run through the slides and give us a summary of the documentary evidence. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 8 can be found on pages 41 to 154 of the committee bundle, and you should find that they're stapled together just so that they don't get all muddled up. And this deals with an application which has been made to record a route known as Lord's Lot Road in the parish of Overkellet, north of Lancaster, as a public bridleway. The plans of the route to be considered by the committee are included, as the Chair mentioned, on pages 115 to 121 of the bundle. And an extract from the location plan should now be visible on the screen. So the application relates to a route along Lord's Lot Road, which is shown between points A, W and H on the committee plans. And this is referred to in the report as the application route. Now, just because nothing's ever straightforward in the world of public rights of way, it's also been necessary to investigate a slightly different route at the eastern exit onto Borwick Road. And this is labelled as AWX on the plan. And this joins Borwick Road just a little bit further south. So this is referred to in the report as the amended route. As part of all our investigations into applications, we carry out a site visit to see whether the route's still available to use, whether there's evidence of any historical physical features, and whether, in the case of an existing route, it deviates at all from the route which may have existed historically. So I carried out a site inspection in September 2020 and took some photographs to show how the route looked at that time. Now, those photographs have been reproduced and included in the committee bundle, which members will have had the opportunity to view prior to the meeting. I don't propose to go through all of the photographs on the screen, but I've picked out a few just to show whilst describing the route. So in this case, our application route starts at the junction with Kirby Longsdale Road at point A on the committee plan and extends in a generally northerly and then northeasterly direction along a stone surface track, which was capable at the time of being used on foot, horseback, bicycle and with vehicles. At point B, there is a kissing gate which exits in the fence, separating the application route from the woodland to the east, providing pedestrian access into the woodlands, which is designated as access land. From point B, the application route continues along a stone surface road bounded on both sides, and a further kissing gate provides access into the woodlands at point C, with vehicular access available to the fields north and west of the application route. From point D, the route continues in a more northeasterly direction and appears to be used less frequently by vehicles. At point E, there is access from the application route to what appears to be an area used to contain livestock north of the route. And beyond this point onwards, there appears to be little or no use of the route with vehicles. So at point F, there's a locked metal barrier erected across the route to prevent vehicles wider than the gap around the side, that are wider than the gap around the side of the barrier. This bypass also allows walkers, cyclists and horse riders to pass and will be wide enough for motorbikes and quad bikes. A Forestry Commission sign is attached to the barrier, specifically forbidding use of motorbikes and quad bikes from the route. Beyond point F, the application route continues along the northern boundary of the woodland and then enters the woodland and continues as an unbounded track rising gently uphill towards Borwick Road. Now at point W, The amended route leaves the application route but is no longer visible on the ground, and the application route continues along the track from point W and is crossed by a further metal barrier at point G. From point G, the application route continues a further 10 metres along the stone surface track to meet Borwick Road at point H. So the total length of the application route between points A, W and H is approximately 1.95 kilometres, as is that of the amended route, so they're kind of the same length. Now, the application under consideration was submitted based on historical map and documentary evidence. It didn't rely on modern user evidence, although some was subsequently considered and will be addressed by my colleague, the solicitor from Legal and Democratic Services, once I've finished. As with all applications, I've examined a variety of maps, plans and other documents to try to discover when the route came into being and to try and determine what its status might be. A detailed assessment of the map and documentary evidence is included in the report and will have been considered by members prior to this meeting. In summary, it's rare to find one single piece of map and documentary evidence which is strong enough to conclude that public rights exist, and it's often the case that we need to examine a body of evidence, often spanning a substantial period of time from which public rights can be inferred, and hence the bulky report that's in front of you. Now, in this case, a previous application, it's just worth noting, a previous application was considered by the County Council in 1985, not long after the 1981 Act introduced the continuous review of the definitive map and statement. This application was rejected, and the current application is supported by much more evidence, and that, together with the fact that our understanding of the relevance of evidence for orders has developed considerably since 1985. So a detailed summary of the evidence is contained in the Legal and Democratic Services section of the report on pages 107 to 108. But just in summary, I think just taking the available map and documentary evidence as a whole, the fact that the route's been shown since the mid-19th century on a series of maps and documents appears on balance that route should be recorded as a public bridle way, but joining Borwick Road at point X and not point H. As I say, at the eastern end of the route, it was noted that there appeared to have been two exit points onto Borwick Road, with the earlier, wider and straighter of the two being to the south of the application route, exiting onto Borwick Road approximately 25 metres south of point H at point X. So that although this route is no longer physically exists, with the only access now being between points G to H, the exit at point H is only shown on the Ordnance Survey maps which record physical existence but do not imply public rights. And there was little modern user evidence submitted as part of the application. So there's no evidence of the other more prominent route being legally stopped up, which was found suggesting that it should be recorded as bridle way. So basically what we're sort of saying is that despite the fact that the application was for what can now be physically used on the ground between points W, G and H, the evidence that we've looked at in terms of the map and documentary evidence that makes us think that it should be recorded as a bridle way takes the route WX at the eastern end. I'll now hand over to my colleague in Legal and Democratic Services just to explain the recommendation made before opening the matter up for any questions and discussion.
Thank you. Members will note that the factors in support made in the order are all set out on page 107 of the report, namely the volume of map and other documentary evidence supporting the existence of a long-standing physical way which could have been used at least on horseback, and the finance action therefore supported was public service. The factors against making an order are some suggestion of the route at least initially being a private road. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services is summarised as follows. The user evidence which was submitted later on is referred to in the addendum. The report is insufficient in number and detail to replace a statutory presumption of dedication of the bridal way in section 31 of the Highways Act. There is, however, a good amount of documentary evidence which, when considered as a whole, shows a picture of the amended route which is referred to as AWX, having been dedicated as a highway. The evidence suggests that back in the 19th century, the route was considered to be private lane, that over the course of time, public rights came into existence. The fact that the amended route appears on historical, commercial, and early OS maps, and tax deduction was claimed for a public right of way, is all indicative of existence of public rights of higher status than those of the footpath. There is insufficient evidence to support public vehicle rights along the amended route AWX, but on balance, the evidence does support private way status. Accordingly, dedication of a public right of way to AWX can be inferred under common law. The order's depiction of the route shows it exiting onto Borwick Road at point X, and whilst an additional exit point at point X did come into existence at some time, point X remained the most prominent exit until around the 1960s, when it disappeared, leaving the only exit onto Borwick Road at point H. Despite the physical existence of a route between W and H, it is considered that there is insufficient evidence on which dedication by the way can be inferred. So in conclusion, committee may be satisfied that the evidence has been discovered, which on balance of probability shows that the public right of way, which is not already recorded, subsists along the amended route only AWX. Accordingly, committee may consider making an order to add a public right of way to the definitive mapping statement, but only along the amended route mentioned AWX, and promoting that order to confirmation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, both of you. Jane, I just want to thank you very much for the in-depth research using so many old maps and other documents that I actually found fascinating to read, and I'm sure everybody else did. So thank you, both of you. It's now open for discussion. Does anyone have any questions or queries? Thank you, Councillor Whittam.
Thank you, Chair. I've noticed it says the Overkill Parish Council have concerns about the surface of parts of the bridal way. And looking at potential bridal way, looking at the pictures, there were some bits where it was flooded and it was pretty poor. They've asked for sort of reassurance that the surface is adequately maintained. Who would actually do that maintenance? Thank you.
What we have to consider here is whether the rights exist. I will answer your question, but I just want to make it clear first that whether anybody's going to maintain it or who maintains it is not something that we can take into account in committee's decision. It's very much a look at do the rights exist. Having said that, I'm not making a secret about it. The maintenance responsibility is quite complicated. And it depends on what the status is. In this case, supposing committee were to decide to make an order for bridalway and that went through, and therefore it has been a bridalway based on historical evidence for a long time, then it would be maintainable, the surface maintainable by the County Council's Highway Authority. If it had been, for instance, that it wasn't all these old maps, but it had been that there was no trace of it until relatively recently, and then for the last 20 odd years, lots of people had been using it, then it would still potentially be a right of way. The committee could still decide that the order be made, and that could still go through to confirmation. But in that case, it would not be maintainable at public expense. The cut-off for public paths, footpaths and bridleways, 1949, if it was in existence before that, not physically, but if it was in existence as a public footpath or public bridleway prior to that, the 1949 Act made them all become publicly maintainable. Since then, it's only ones that have been through a legal creation process or adoption process that makes them publicly maintainable. Carriageways, it's slightly different, but we're not looking at carriageway unless committee decides otherwise. We're not looking at carriageway rights.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or queries? Thank you. I'm going to read through the recommendations so that we all know what we're going to be proposing and seconding. Number 1, that the application for the addition of a bridleway along Lord's Lot Road over Kellet be accepted with amendment. That an order be made pursuant to section 53(2)(b) and section 53(3)(c)(1) of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to add to the definitive map and statement of public rights of way a bridleway along Lord's Lot Road over Kellet as shown on the committee plan between points A, W, X. That being satisfied that the higher test for confirmation can be met and the order be promoted to confirmation. Do I have a proposer for the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Salter. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whittam. Thank you. Oh, yes. May we have a vote on that, please? Those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Item number 9. Executive summary is an application for the addition to the definitive map and statement of a bridleway and upgrade to bridleway, a footpath Withnell 49 from Twistmore Lane past Woodsfold Farm, Withnell to Bolton Road, which is the A675. And just to help you, the committee plan that will be referred to showing the application route is on page 207. I'm now going to hand over to Jane again, who will show us the slides and give us a summary of the documentary evidence. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair has explained, agenda item 9 can be found on pages 155 to 238 of the committee bundle. It details an investigation into an application for the addition of a bridleway, an upgrade to bridleway, of Footpath Withnell 49 from Twistmore Road past Woodsfold Farm, Withnell to Bolton Road. So the route is shown on the committee plan on page 207 of the committee bundle between points A, B, C, D, E, F and G. You will note that a second access onto Bolton Road between points F and H is also shown on the plan, but this did not form part of the application route. So site inspection was carried out in January 2021 and the photographs contained in the committee bundle are included on pages 212 to 237 and they were taken. So the total length of the route is approximately 760 metres and it commences at the junction with Twistmore Lane and Dole Lane at point A on the committee plan. From point A, the route extends in a southeasterly direction along a tarmac road to the entrance of a disused quarry at point B. From point B, the application route continues in a generally easterly direction along the tarmac roadway to the entrance to Woodsfold Timber Yard, which is just beyond that entrance is point C. So at point C, the route recorded as Footpath Withnell 49 leaves the application route to continue north through the timber yard. You can just see on the photograph there the style which takes you off the application route and along the footpath. So from point C, the application route continues along a compacted stone surface track to point D, where it's crossed by a padlocked gate. On the north side of the gate is a gap which restricts access to about 1.5 metres and a clear earth and stone trod can be seen on the ground through this gap. The route continues as a substantial compacted earth and stone surface track bounded on both sides from the adjacent land. It descends to cross a culverted watercourse and then ascends again quite steeply, passing through Point E, where a track leaves the route to continue south. From Point E, the route continues northeast downhill to Point F to cross another culverted watercourse where the route forks just before reaching the A675. Now, the route splits with both tracks continuing for a short distance of approximately 20 metres each to rise uphill to meet the A675 at Point G and Point H. Padlock gates have been erected across both parts of the route, apparently to prevent motorised vehicle use. So the application route follows the route between F and G at this point. Oh, that's the wrong. Yeah, that's the wrong slide. That's from the previous agenda item. Okay, so again, the evidence submitted in support of the application consisted of historical map and documentary evidence, together with some limited user evidence. So I examined a variety of maps, plans and other documents to discover when the route came into being and to try to determine what its status might be. And details of this investigation are included in the committee report provided to members ahead of this meeting. The application was for the addition / upgrade of the route to Bridal Way, but the investigation carried out also considered whether the evidence was strong enough to infer that the route carried public vehicle rights. On this, obviously, we receive an application. It could be for a footpath, it could be for a bridle way, it could be for higher vehicle rights, but we always look not just at the evidence that's been submitted by the applicant, but a whole range of map and documentary evidence that we can unearth and unravel and find. So it involves quite a lot of digging around to see what we can find. And sometimes the conclusion that we might come to is that different rights might exist than what were originally applied for. So this here is a case of where the application was for Bridal Way, but the map and documentary evidence that we're looking at, we feel shows that there was something more than that. We feel that it was an old public vehicle route. So, as I explained in relation to the last committee item, it's rare to find one single piece of map or documentary evidence which is strong enough to conclude that a bridle way or public vehicle rights exists. And it's often the case that we look at a whole body of evidence spanning a long period of time to try and build up a picture of what public rights can be inferred. So the comments below in terms of the summary refer to our section A to G, but not the little sort of section at the end F to H, which was considered separately. So to conclude, from the research carried out, it appears that the route has existed as a substantial route since at least the late 1700s and was consistently shown on a series of early small-scale commercial maps and the tide map of 1840, suggesting that it was wide enough to be used by horse-drawn vehicles at that time. The early commercial maps and the tide map show it as being part of the route through Bristol and Withnell to Bolton Road, which was the former Turnpike Road, prior to the construction of Dole Lane in the mid to late 1840s. And its depiction on these maps in such a way is suggestive of public vehicle use. The application route was shown on early Ordnance Survey maps with a thickened line to indicate a well-maintained carriage road. And even after the construction of Dole Lane, the application route is still shown on all maps examined, including small-scale maps published primarily for the motoring public, as a substantial route often clearly identified in map keys as being considered as a public road. In addition, it's consistently shown as an ungated through route passing through a working quarry, but quite clearly not diverted by the quarry, suggesting the importance of the route as one used by the public. So use of the route by vehicles appears to have declined by the 1960s onwards, possibly due to the fact that it wasn't tarmacked and that it was more undulating and less direct than Dole Lane. Since that time, however, the route has still been used as access to the former quarry site and to the woodyard via point A, although public vehicular access along the full length of the route is now restricted by gates at point D and between points F and G. The route between point F and H is not shown to exist on any maps examined until 1968, although the 1940s aerial suggests that it might have existed at that time. However, this section wasn't applied for, and there's no user evidence submitted in support of the use of that section by the public. So I'll now just hand back to the chair before she sort of hands over to Celia to continue our assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. We'll now turn to Saeed for the summary of legal services. Thank you, Celia.
Just to reiterate the factors in support of making the order, these are all set out on pages 203 and 204. I'll just highlight them basically. So the first point is substantial amount of documentary evidence supporting the physical existence of the route marked A to G as being a substantial route and which was capable of being used for postal value since at least the 1700s. Secondly, with the exception of the two witnesses who refer to a horse rider having been turned away in recent times, there is an absence of any action being taken by landowners to prevent the use of the route. And thirdly, the user evidence of long use on foot, horseback and pedal cycle. The factors against making an order are, firstly, the volume of user evidence is not substantial. It should be noted, however, this fact is only relevant when committee are considering the weight to be attached to modern user evidence. Secondly, there are two witnesses who refer to a horse rider having been turned away whilst using the route in recent times. And thirdly, the gates have been erected in recent years at the western end of the route, which may indicate a lack of intention to dedicate by the landowners. The conclusion from Legal and Democratic Services is set out on pages 204 to 206 and can be summarised as follows. As there is no express dedication to the route, the committee is required to consider whether there is sufficient evidence from which dedication to the route can be deemed in Section 31 of the Highways Act 1980, or whether it can be inferred at common law. In the case of the part of the route marked B to C, the Planning and Environment Group have investigated this route and considered whether the section route ought to be a highway of a different status, carrying higher public rights, namely the status of a restricted byway. Having taken all the evidence into account, you will see that officers have concluded that on balance, due to the substantial documentary evidence from as early as the late 1700s, there was sufficient evidence to infer historic dedication of the route marked A to G as a carriageway. Consequently, it suggested an order be made to record this route as a restricted byway, including the upgrading of B to C from footpath to restricted byway. In the alternative, only when committee do not consider the documentary evidence to sufficiently infer historic dedication, it suggested that the user evidence may be sufficient for dedication to be deemed under Section 31 of the Highways Act and or inferred at common law. 8 user evidence forms were submitted. The analysis can be found on pages 201 and 202. There is insufficient evidence at this time to make an order to record that part of the route marked F to H as a bridle way. This length did not form part of the application route as Jane mentioned, and there is no user evidence submitted for it. And it appears to have been laid out relatively recently when compared to the route A to G in approximately the 1940s, and certainly existed by 1968. The committee should also note that the route marked F to H would not impact or hinder the use of the route A to G. Officers are therefore of the view that on balance sufficient evidence has been discovered from which dedication of A to G can be inferred due to historic documentary evidence, but that there is insufficient evidence to support the use of an order in respect to section F to H at this time. So in conclusion, the committee is advised to approve the application for route A to G and to make an order adding a restricted byway and to the definitive map and statement as set out in the committee report, and that this order is promoted to confirmation.
Thank you, Celia. We're now going to ask for questions or queries from members. Do you have any? Oh, sorry, didn't see you. Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a quick comment to say I'm actually quite satisfied. I think looking at the evidence, it does look to be sufficient. So I would be happy to recommend, in line with the officer's recommendation, the addition of restricted byway and the upgrading of footpath with 049 to restricted byway.
So is that a proposal?
Yes, indeed.
Right. Well, can I just ask members to turn to page 235, because I have just a comment to make from my site visit. You notice that at the bottom of the picture, the old road curbstones are actually curved in the middle, and I think that designates the older, the original path, but I don't know whether I'm meant to say that, but I have. We have had a proposer for the officer's recommendations. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, Councillor Litton. And would you kindly show the way that you feel? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Right. Item number 10. This is an application for the addition of a footpath from Aspen Lane to Mill Lane, southwest of West End Primary School, in accordance with file number 804641. And again, the committee plan that's being referred to is on page 283. And again, we're going to hand over to Jane, who will give us a summary of the documentary evidence and show us the slides. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. This agenda item 10 deals with an application to record a route as a public footpath. The report can be found on pages 239 to 296 of the committee bundle. And as Chair explains, the application route is shown on the committee plan, which is on page 283 of the bundle, and is just currently presented on the screen. And the route is shown by a thick dashed line between point A and point B. Just you will note from viewing the committee plan that we do refer to the route being from Aspen Lane to Mill Lane. Aspen Lane is recorded as an unclassified county road. It's also recorded as Bridal Way, Oswald Whistle 300. So you can see on the plan it is actually marked BW 300. That is Aspen Lane. And Mill Lane is recorded both on the highway records as Peel Bank Road, F6365, a bit of a mouthful, but also on the definitive map as Oswald Whistle 23. So it's there as FP23. But in the report, the highways at the two ends of the application route are referred to as Aspen Lane and Mill Lane. So that's just for clarity in case it's a little bit confusing. Okay, so I carried out a site inspection in September 2020. The total length of this route is approximately 60 metres, and it commences at the open junction with Aspen Lane at point A on the committee plan. From point A, the route passes through the entrance to All Saints Church. But instead of continuing up the slope to the church car park, the application route branches off from the access road to run north-northwest along a compacted stone path adjacent to a fence separating the church from Oswald Whistle West End Primary School playing field. You can just see the gravel path there, departing from the access to the car park, and it's running alongside the school playing field. So it follows the boundary along the stone surface path for approximately 60 metres before it meets Mill Lane at an open junction at point B. There it is, meeting the junction. So there were no signs indicating whether the route was considered to be public or private noted on site, although there was a local authority dog waste bin which had been located part way along the route, and at the time I inspected it, a number of people were seen using the route on foot. So again, as is the case for all applications that we receive, whether they're user evidence applications or based on map and documentary evidence, we always look at the maps, we always look at all the old maps to examine them to discover when the route plans come into being and to try and determine what its status might be. So again, details of all the map and documents examined are provided in the committee report, which members will have read prior to the meeting. And with regards to the map and documentary evidence, just in conclusion, the application route is not shown on any of the small-scale commercial maps which predated the first edition Ordnance Survey maps from the 1840s, and it's not shown on some of the later small-scale commercial maps published in the 1900s. Now, this isn't necessarily unexpected because we're looking at an application for a footpath, and you wouldn't necessarily expect something a footpath to be shown on some of these very small-scale early commercial maps. However, the route is consistently shown to have physically existed along the same route from the 1840s through to the current day on all the Ordnance Survey maps inspected, and is shown on most, but not all of the maps, to have been a bounded route, originally splitting a single field, which later became two separately numbered fields. On a number of the OS maps, the application route is annotated as a footpath, with the letters FP, and it appears that gates may have existed at either end. Now, by the 1950s, the land to the east of the route appears to have become a playing field, as shown on the 1957 Ordnance Survey map, and it remains fenced off as part of Oswald Twistle West End Primary School. In 1962, the land crossed by the application route was sold to provide for All Saints Church to be built, and the application route was not affected by the construction of the church and appears to have remained unaltered. And of significance is the 1962 conveyance, which specifically states that the land was sold subject to the rights of the public over and along the footway or cart track, which was identified as being the application route on a plan attached to the conveyance. So the existence of a public right-of-way is subsequently marked on a plan showing the church, which was attached to a conveyance of the land, transferring the land and the church from the diocese and parochial church council to the commissioners and the incumbent on trust in 1965. So in summary, it's clear that the application route existed since at least the mid-1800s and appears to have been accessible at least on foot since that time. The 1962 conveyance of land crossed by the application route clearly refers to the landowner's acknowledgement of the existence of a public right-of-way along the application route and the sale of the land subject to those rights being retained. The Ordnance Survey maps and aerial photographs, together with more recent site evidence, all support the application and the user evidence that has been provided. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jane. So Leah will now present the summary from Legal Services, and can I please ask you to use your loudest voice? We'd be very grateful. Thank you.
So item number 10, you will note that the Legal and Democratic Services details are set out on pages 277 to 278, and these give details of the 4 user evidence forms provided in support of the application and the map and documentary evidence section of the report which Jane has been through, which was on page 242 to 277, and we had information from landowners. Your attention is then drawn to the assessment of the evidence and to the conclusion on pages 280 to 282. You will note that the claim is that the route should be recorded as a public footpath in the definitive map and statement. The factors in support of making this order are: number 1, some user evidence; number 2, map and other documentary evidence supporting the physical existence of the route; number 3, the absence of signs and notices along the route stating that the route was not public; number 4, the absence of action taken by landowners to discourage the use of the route. The factors against making the order are the low number of user evidence forms that we've had, that have only been 4 submitted. As there has been no express dedication in this matter, it needs to be considered on balance whether there is sufficient evidence to infer dedication in common law and then from all the circumstances, or for the criteria in section 31, Highways Act, for deemed dedication to be satisfied based on sufficient 20 years as of right use having taken place, ending with the route being called into question. So firstly, considering inferred dedication of common law, which requires the committee to consider whether the information from all the maps and documentary evidence coupled with the evidence inside and the user evidence indicate that it can be reasonably inferred that in the past the landowners intended to dedicate the route and the public have accepted such. The 1962 conveyance is of significance as this demonstrates that at such time it was considered that a public route already existed and the owner intended for such to be maintained and continued. The 4 user evidence forms submitted for the route show it would appear that the landowner failed to take any clear action to prevent public use resulting in continued use by the public for many years, such that on balance there may be sufficient evidence from which to infer dedication of common law. In the alternative, the committee may consider a deemed dedication of the route under section 31 Highways Act 1980 has occurred. For a deemed dedication to occur, the use needs to be as of right, without interruption, and for a full period of 20 years immediately prior to the route being called into question, which in this instance, the 20-year period runs from 2000 to 2020. From the 4 user evidence forms provided, all such users have used the route through the 20-year period as of right. The committee's attention is drawn to the fact that although there is no set number of users or amount of use to give rise to this presumption of deemed dedication, it is suggested that 4 would be a very low amount and such on its own would not be sufficient to satisfy the test. However, the committee should also note the guidance from the planning inspectorate indicates the use of the route must be by a sufficient number of people who together may sensibly be taken to represent the public at large. So the committee may consider these 4 users of the route are representative of the public at large, and therefore the evidence does raise a presumption of dedication and does satisfy the statutory test. On balance, however, you will see that after careful consideration, it is suggested that the criteria under section 31 of the Highways Act 1980 is considered insufficient on this occasion to infer dedication. However, in the alternative, it is considered that there is sufficient evidence on which to infer dedication of common law. So that the 2 different ones, the criteria under section 31 is for deemed dedication, and then you have common law, which you can infer dedication from. So the recommendation of officers is therefore that the application be accepted and an order be made, being satisfied that the higher test of confirmation can be met and that the order is promoted to confirmation.
Thank you very much, Celia. Are there any queries or questions from any members about this item? Yes?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a very brief one. Jane Elliott picked up on something which I thought was interesting and said that,
a quick conflict.
Yeah, I might just...
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt, sorry? I've just said we would promote the order to confirmation, but on this occasion, this order would need to be coming back to committee before we can confirm based on the evidence.
So we're not going to confirmation today?
We can make the order, but when it comes to confirmation, it would need to return to committee.
So we omit number 3 in the recommendation?
Yeah, it's noted in the recommendation is correct.
I just turn to David for a final...
The reason for that is that the test for making an order to add a new route to the definitive map, or an existing, rather, not new route, but newly added to the definitive map, is that it is either on balance that it is a public right of way, or that it is reasonably alleged to be a public right of way. But reasonably alleged is not sufficient to confirm the order. So because this is so finely balanced, we say that we're recommending to committee that there is enough evidence to make that order, because it is reasonable to allege it, but it is not sufficient to say on balance that a right of way subsists. It is finely balanced, and committee might decide either way, but that's our recommendation.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Salter, do you want to finish your question, and then I'll ask the members about that point?
Well, thank you. I was intrigued that mention was made of the fact that there's a local authority dog waste bin at the location, and I really wondered, you know, kind of what difference that makes. Is that something that you would really only have if this route has a particular status or not? I suppose, given it's finely balanced, it may be relevant. I'm just interested.
You're absolutely right. It is a very small bit of evidence, but it is evidence that the district would have put a dog bin where there was evidence of dog waste. The dog waste would have been there because people were using it as though it were a public footpath. It's unlikely that it would only be people with private rights who would be letting their dogs foul the area and need the bin. So yes, it's not very strong evidence, but it is some evidence. And the fact that the landowner didn't say, "Oh, you can't put that dog bin there," it's small evidence, but yes, it's all about, all these considerations are about building up these small pieces and putting them together and seeing the bigger picture. But yeah, absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other queries or questions, especially about the point 3 of the officer's recommendation? Sorry, Councillor Salter.
This perhaps a silly question, but I'm interested. Does it make any difference whether the committee feels that there is sort of evidence to infer dedication in common law, or whether we feel that there is deemed dedication under the 1980 Highways Act in terms of the third point on the recommendation, or does that not really make any difference in this case?
It can apply either way. That it could be that you're only considering Section 31 or only considering common law dedication, and it still applies that there's those sort of two levels you might look at, whether it's reasonably alleged to meet the Section 31 test, or whether it's reasonably alleged to have been dedicated at common law, that you can take that inference, or that it gets to that higher stage of, yes, we think on the balance of probabilities it shows either under Section 31 or common law. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, no, that's good.
Anybody else? I think what I'm going to do is ask for a proposer for officers' recommendations on points 1 and 2, and then do point 3 separately. Is that all right? Right. May I have a proposer, please, for the officers' recommendations for points 1 and 2?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whittam. Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can we just do...
And all those in favour of proposing 1 and 2?
So, Chair, the officer's trying to...
I was just going to say, well, can we do all those in favour and all those not in favour, just to clarify if we've got anybody not in favour?
Okay, yes. All those in favour of points 1 and 2? Thank you. And now, because it's been explained to us that the test for confirmation is finely balanced, do we feel that there's sufficient evidence to move forward to confirmation, which is point 3? Do we have a proposer for point 3? Thank you, Councillor Cheetham. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Haythornthwaite. And all those in favour of proposing point 3?
Chairman, could I just clarify quickly? Are we proposing point 3 as the officers have recommended it, or are we proposing that there is evidence, sufficient evidence for it to be confirmed?
To move forward to confirmation.
Right.
So, Chair,
Yes.
if we vote against point 3, does that mean that it doesn't come back to committee? And what happens then?
David.
It's about being clear what the vote is. Yeah, so there are various options. You could, committee could decide to accept officer's recommendation, say not satisfied, and therefore that after the order has been made to come back to committee. Or it could be that committee decides that there is enough and it should be promoted to confirmation. Or it could be, as you've just said, that actually committee doesn't say anything, in which case we make the order and by default eventually we're going to come back to committee and say what do we do next. So I think it really comes down to two options. It comes down to either committee consider there is not enough evidence for confirming the order as the recommendation, or to say yes, there is enough and it should be promoted to confirmation as well. So those are really the only two options.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Howard?
I'm somewhat confused, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, there are three recommendations there. I really don't see why we're taking them in parts.
But I think it's because David pointed out to us that the evidence to move forward to confirmation is so finely balanced that we might not be able to be quite so sure about that as we are about point 1 and point 2. But if we feel that the evidence is sufficient to move forward to confirmation, then we should be happy to vote for it to go forward to confirmation. Does that help or hinder?
Chairman, I suggest that any member of the committee could make a proposal and could propose to accept it, or propose something different. Yes, as you said, at the moment you've got one that has, therefore, if it's seconded, a vote needs to be taken on.
Yes. Yes. So we've had a proposer, thank you, Councillor Cheetham. We've had a seconder. For those in favour of moving point 3 as far as confirmation today. Is that right?
So I've forgotten what the proposer said.
So can I just clarify, Madam Chairman, are we moving point 3 but having amended the text to say that we are satisfied that the higher test for confirmation can be made and therefore that it be promoted to confirmation? So we're right. Yes. So we're just amending recommendation 3.
So I should also mention that obviously legal recommendation is that there is evidence to confirm that higher test can be satisfied, but obviously ultimately it's for you to make the decision, and that is in all cases. So every single order that we're doing today, you'll be asked, do we have evidence to support the order, and are we happy for that order to be confirmed? So it's going to be, that's going to be asked on each one, so it's not a single one that we're singling out on this one. I should just point out.
So you'd rather I hadn't separated it?
No, you just, yeah. Probably better just reading the whole recommendation and saying we're making the order and having it confirmed and then doing a vote.
But being aware that the last point is finely balanced.
Yeah.
Right, Councillor Haythornthwaite,
Well,
you had
I
a
was going to
question.
say, I think I was confused by the question on that last vote. And I think that we should do it again, but we do need to be very clear about what it is we're voting. The officers slightly confused me still further, I think, by saying that there is enough evidence. I thought the issue was that there isn't enough evidence for confirmation at this stage.
Right.
And that's why it's coming back. Is that not correct?
No, it confused me as well. Don't feel bad about it. The recommendation in the papers that you've got in front of you is the third point being that not being satisfied. But it is finely balanced. 4 is a very low number. There are other things, as Councillor Salter said, for instance, the dogging. There's some documentary evidence is supportive of it. It's the reason for the recommendation in the papers saying not being satisfied comes down to this low number. Oswald Twistle is not a remote place. This is on the edge of a reasonably sized area where you would perhaps expect more than 4, and that's the caution there. But if committee considers that those 4, together with the other stuff, those 4 represent public at large satisfactorily, and it's quality evidence, it's just not quantity, then it would perfectly be in order for a committee to decide to pursue its confirmation.
Councillor Oakes.
Yeah, just to say that I think on the basis that it's finely balanced and that it's up to the committee to make the decision and that it would come back to committee anyway, I would support the officer's recommendation because we're not refusing it. It's going to come back to committee anyway.
Right. So it perhaps. Right.
Shall we have?
So the proposal, are we now withdrawing what Councillor Cheetham has proposed, or? Because
I understood Councillor Cheetham to say that we go with the recommendation 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
yes.
So
For it to go forward to confirmation.
No. I understood Councillor Cheetham to be saying go with the recommendation on the papers,
right,
which is to not be satisfied that the higher test can be met, but to come back to committee
today,
after
right,
the order.
And Councillor Oakes, from what you've just said, would you be happy to second that?
I second supporting the officer's recommendation.
Yes. Are you happy with that?
Well, Madam Chairman, I'd just say very briefly, I think in terms of the proposal that we had before, in terms of what was said beforehand and then the proposal that was made, I understood very much that it was a proposal to amend sort of section 3 on the basis of saying that we were satisfied that the higher test for confirmation could be made. Now, that can be withdrawn and we can go with 3 on the basis of officer's recommendation, but certainly the proposal that we had, I think, was on the basis of amending that. And I think to be fair, we've had the discussion, perhaps we should have a vote as a committee on which way we want to go.
Yeah. I can say I understand that the proposer has clarified that she's proposing to accept the recommendation. That's how I understand it. So if the proposer has clarified that.
So, Chair, you've already taken a vote on 1 and 2.
Yes, we have.
Yes, we're only looking at.
So you accepted the application and you've agreed to make an order.
Yes, but not on part 3 yet. So Councillor Cheetham has proposed that we go with the officer's recommendation, but Councillor Salter is suggesting we could have a counter proposal.
Yeah, fine. I'll propose.
Right.
I'll propose 3 on the basis of the higher test for confirmation and promoting the order for confirmation.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't understand a word of that.
Sorry, I got my words wrong.
Thank you. Councillor Burrows, sorry. Yes, Councillor Burrows seconds that proposal. So we're going to have a vote, first of all, that the finely balanced evidence means that it doesn't move forward to confirmation now. It perhaps comes back to another meeting later on. And that's the first vote.
That's the recommendation.
And that's the recommendation. And the second vote is a counter proposal that the finely balanced evidence does show that we can move forward to confirmation today. Right, so we'll take a vote on the first proposal, which is those in favour of the officer's proposal that it's not ready to go forward to confirmation today. Thank you. And now we'll take a vote on the second proposal, that there is sufficient evidence to move forward to confirmation today. If I'm allowed to vote. Thank you. So the vote shows that committee is in favour of the officer's recommendation that the finely balanced evidence does not show sufficient to move forward to confirmation. Thank you. Agenda item 11. And this is the one where you have the revised location plan on your table when you walked in. It's an application for the addition of a footpath from the junction with Footpath Rottenstall 206, leading from Hillside Drive, New Church, to the junction with Footpath Rottenstall 392 to be added to the definitive map and statement of public rights of way. And the committee plan is on page 331. And we'll move again to Jane, who will run through the slides and give us the summary of the documentary evidence. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So this is agenda item 11. The committee plan is projected onto the screen for you. The committee report can be found on page 297 to 344 of the committee bundle, and this plan is included on page 331. And again, if I can just bring to the attention of members that the location plan on page 333 of the committee bundle incorrectly shows the location of the application route, and a revised plan has been provided today, a paper copy provided today to show the actual location of the route. Okay, so a site inspection was carried out in 2019. The application is for the addition of a footpath. It commences at point A on the committee plan. It's a point on an existing footpath which runs from Kirkdale Avenue east of Home Farm. And from point A, the route crosses a stone stile which is constructed in a wall, and then it continues in a westerly direction for a distance of approximately 35 metres as an enclosed route through to point B. It's bounded on both sides to the south by fencing and building forming part of Home Farm, and to the north by garden fences separating it from 16 and 18 Hillside Drive. The route varies in width from 1 to 1.5 metres and appears to have been surfaced at some point with compacted stone, although this is sort of grown over slightly. When I inspected the route in 2019, there was evidence that the route was being used and that vegetation overhanging the route close to point B had been recently cut. Okay. As detailed in the committee report, again, a variety of maps, plans and other documents were examined to discover when the route might have come into being and to try to determine what status it might be. Okay, there's no map and documentary evidence to suggest that the application route existed before the housing development was built. So you'll notice in this particular report, you haven't got as many of the old maps that we have become accustomed to looking at in some of the earlier items. Okay, the first map to show the route was dated 1987, and although lines are shown across it at point A and point B, this does not necessarily mean that access was not available given the information on site of the style and estate layout. The application is based on user evidence, which is supported by the map and photographic evidence post-1987. And our investigation found nothing to suggest that the route could not or was not in use throughout the years referred to in the user evidence. So I'll hand back to the Chair before Celia takes us further on to the report.
Thank you very much, Jane. Now to Celia for a summary from Legal Services. Thank you.
Thank you. The factors in support of the order are set out on page 328 of the report. We have user evidence reports, evidence of some others' views that the physical route fenced out from land used by private residents, in the absence of notices and signs along the route stating the route is not public. The landowner has taken no action against the public use. There are no factors against making an order. The conclusion, legal service, democratic services, can be summarised on page 328. I'll just set out a few factors from page 328. The historical map evidence evaluated within the report demonstrates the route is unlikely to have been in existence prior to 1960. The Land Registry title plan stated 1987 was the first plans to show the application route. The officer evaluating the map evidence concluded the route was likely to have existed in or by 1987. Land Registry title plans confirmed that at this time the houses on Hillside Drive had been built in the area of 2000, also substantiate the existence of the properties on Hillside Drive. On balance, the historical map and documentary evidence on its own is considered to be insufficient to conclude the route was a historical public footpath. It is therefore necessary for the committee to consider the user evidence and other circumstances in that context. The style is noted along the route to facilitate access, and as of right use evidence by 7 users dates back to 1 in 1972. The developer acquired the farmland in 1986, and the route was physically created between the fence lines leading to the style. So it suggested to the committee that the creation of the route by the owner and the use by the public is of sufficient quantity and quality for which dedication may on balance be inferred. So the committee will also note that deemed dedication in section 31 of the Highways Act 1980 can also be established in this case if there has been sufficient use by the public during the relative period of 20 years under consideration from 2000 to 2020. It's being used as of right. We do have one landowner who has submitted a user evidence form, so we have to be careful when we're talking about as of right when we have landowners. On this occasion, it is sufficient and it has been used without interruption during the 20-year period. So in conclusion, it's recommended to the committee to accept the application as on balance, deemed dedication in section 31 can be satisfied, or dedication inferred from all the circumstances, including the use and an order being made. A higher test of confirmation can be met and the order be promoted to confirmation.
Thank you very much, Celia. Now open for questions and queries from members. Thank you, Councillor Whittam, and then Councillor Oakes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very new to this committee. So I just wanted to ask a question about inspections. So obviously the inspections for this footpath were in 2019, which is 2 years ago. Is there any requirement when the inspection should be carried out in relation to when it comes to before us as a committee? Any sort of guidelines on that? And because looking at those pictures, it was already open on there, and I know you say there was evidence that they've been cut. But obviously, in the last 2 years, especially during lockdown, footpaths have been used more, so there might have been more evidence of it being used, if you get what I mean, at that time. So, thank you, Chair.
What we tend to do is, when an application comes in, up until recently, when we've been completely flooded out with applications, I've tried to get out pretty quickly to just look at a route and take some photographs, just because things change, and often an application, especially when it's relating to user evidence, it's quite often put in because something's changed, something's been blocked off, something's been altered, so we get photos. But ultimately, in looking to see whether public rights exist, we're looking at what happened prior to the application. So the submission of the application or a blocking of a route is often what prompts, triggers this sort of question, is it a right of way or not? So we're looking in the past. So it is difficult. I mean, sometimes I go and look at it. It doesn't matter that it was 2 years ago, because the user evidence that we're considering was prior to the application being submitted. Sometimes I'm looking at something like Lord's Lock Road, for example, that we looked at. We're looking at map and documentary evidence. I still go and look at it to see what's there now and what's on the ground, but it's not always relevant to the evidence and the fact that you might go out now as a chairman, this witness it and not be able to get along or even see the remains of the route that was there 2 years ago. So,
Thank you. David wants to follow up.
I was going to echo what James just said, really. That we're looking, when we're considering definitive modification orders, it's very much evidence of what does exist. And it's what exists at the time when the route's brought into question. Any user evidence since then doesn't count. It's what the application is one of the ways that a route can be brought into question. It can also be questioned by putting a fence across it or a big notice up, but in the absence of anything else, that application is what ends a period of use. And so what happens after then is not helpful, and in fact it can be off-putting, in fact. And that's one of the reasons why we don't take everybody out in a coach to go and look at the sites every time or any time. When we haven't got any on the agenda for this meeting, but future meetings there will often be Highways Act orders when we're looking at what is a good idea, what committee thinks ought to be a diversion or extinguishment. In addition to meeting the legal test, is then subjective, and then it's often worth considering what the thing looks like. But these definitive modification order applications are very much evidence of what happened before that application was made. So, as Jane said, she goes to look at them as soon after the application as possible, because that's the most relevant time, and what happens since then it tends not to be.
Thank you, Chair. It wasn't a criticism, it was just helping my understanding of how this process works.
Absolutely, and asking questions gives us a chance to clarify.
Thank you. Councillor Oakes next, and then.
This is fairly local to me, and having done the training, I wouldn't dream of saying something like common sense. I wouldn't dream of it. But I mean, residents who aren't burdened with an understanding of the legal situation are using the path anyway. So I'd have no hesitation supporting that recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Burrows.
Could I just ask a question around if this is adopted or confirmed? I noticed there's steps here, stone steps. And I know because I do quite a bit of trekking, in wet weather, these can become slippy. So as it would become the responsibility of the county council to actually maintain this pathway. You know, what happens if somebody slipped? You know, in this compensation culture that we've got, what would happen if somebody slipped during the winter months when there was heavy rainfall?
I'll start off with I nearly said it doesn't matter if somebody slips. I don't mean that. I mean, for the purposes of making the decision whether the rights exist or not, which is what the committee are being asked to decide, whether there's enough evidence of it to make an order, to record it, whether it's actually a lot more dangerous than that or not isn't relevant to that decision. That's about managing a right of way that does or doesn't exist. There's two distinct stages. Does a public right exist? And then what do we do about it if it does, or if it doesn't? In this particular case, if we're looking at evidence, and this is pretty clear cut, that if there is enough evidence, it certainly wasn't before 1949. In fact, it wasn't before 1960. So we therefore are saying, unless it was brought into being, and I mean the rights, not the physical thing, if those rights were brought into being by some legal process, a formal dedication agreement or a creation order or something like that, or diversion order, if it was brought in with one of those mechanisms, then it would be publicly maintainable. If it was public rights arose from user, from people walking up and down it, then it's not publicly maintainable. So it isn't public liability if people slip on the steps. We might be wary of something that's dangerous if it was going to be publicly maintainable, but we still cannot decide, no, these rights don't exist because it's dangerous. it sounds harsh, but there's a clear distinction between what committee are being asked to decide, and that is very much whether those rights exist, not whether it's a good idea or whether it's safe.
Thank you. Am I allowed to ask a question?
You have to ask yourself.
Oh, sorry. After you, Councillor Cheetham.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to say, with regard to the intro to this particular application on page 298, I noticed at the bottom of that page, it intimated that my local authority actually didn't respond to this. Well, I have to say to you that there would have been a bit of difficulty because when the amalgamation came about with the borough councils and the urban districts, certain records were supposedly put in a very safe place, and unfortunately they were lost through the floods in 1976, and are most probably very good compost somewhere. But this was really a tragedy, because this is most probably why the Borough Council were not in a position to offer a lot of information on that score, because a lot of things happened just before the amalgamation of local government at that time. And where this site is, of course, is also a historical place of interest as well, most of which was either owned by the church, which had been there over 500 or odd years, and of course those records were with the Diocese of Manchester anyway, the old diocese. And in actual fact, we have a very strong civic society in Rochdale who have a lot more information, oddly enough, than the local authority with regard to pre-existences. And of course, one of the exciting features about Rosendale is that we do have a lot of these sort of what I call ancient tracts, which now people think are public rights of way, which some of them are not, but they still use them as access points and for rambling purposes and people who ride horses and things. So I have to say it is one of those areas where there's a crossover of where things perhaps were not marked, but there are certain features, and I think the fact that some of the ancient evidence that was just brought up was quite interesting, and I just thought, well, there was obviously quite a lot going on that farm and mill further down, so I have to say we have to look at it now as to what has been handed down through Chinese whispers to a certain extent, and where the little feet have plodded. But I just wanted to make that thought that it's unusual for our council not to make observations, but I think one of the problems there was because we lost an awful lot of records in 1978, which were all connected with water trails and other planning elements within that area, which was really quite a serious matter at the time.
Thank you very much for your observations, Councillor Cheetham. I'm sorry you lost your records in the floods. My question, if I'm allowed, just to follow on from Councillor Burrow's potential danger of the public using this. From my site visit on the farmyard side, we both observed falling down wood and jutting out nails. So if we make the order, what's going to happen about that potential danger?
Well, there's a combination of things that where potentially the barn, if that was falling down, then it would be a question of getting the owners to make sure it didn't fall down on the footpath. With the sort of tatty fence and with nails and things, again, that is the owner of the fence. In practice, it's probably quicker for our officer to actually do it than it is to go and find the owner and tell them to do it. So that there's a flexibility, there is a pragmatism that we would apply in managing it. But I will repeat again, that's very much, the management of it is very much separate to the assessment of whether rights exist.
I understand, thank you. Any more questions or queries? Do we have a proposer for the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Oakes. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Haythornthwaite. All those in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. Right. Agenda item number 12. This involves an investigation into the addition to and deletion from the definitive map and statement of part of Footpath, Horton 11, near Chorley. And the committee plan for this application route is on page 375. And this time we're going to hand over to Hannah, who will run through the slides and give us a summary of the documentary evidence. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. So item 12 starts on page 345 and is another definitive map modification order, though it is slightly different in that we have an addition and a deletion of a length of footpath 11 in Horton, which Horton in Chorley Borough. By way of a brief background, this one came about from a query to the Public Rights of Way team relating to the sale of a property, where the property search results highlighted that the public right of way was recorded as going directly through the property. Officers looked at the definitive map, which is the legal record, and the available mapping, and it was evidence that the footpath was recorded as going directly through the property. The property itself is 3 terraced cottages and was shown on the Ordnance Survey maps to have been in existence on the same footprint for over 100 years, and therefore we determined that an investigation was required to investigate the correct line of the footpath. So there is no applicant, as this is an internal investigation, and there is no user evidence, it's all based on documentary evidence. So the route to be determined is shown on committee plan on page 375, and it is shown as 2 routes. The route to be added is shown between points A, B, C, D, E, and the route to be deleted is shown between points E, F, G, and you can see where it crosses the property there. So if we take a quick look at what is on the ground, this is the currently used route and is the route to be added. It starts at point A on Valley Road and it heads up a short driveway, and you can see there's a public footpath sign on the left indicating that the route goes down the driveway. It continues along the driveway up to a gate and stile at point B. This is just a quick look back towards point A. The used route then continues along to the properties and it heads around the west side of the buildings. It then continues along the clearly used route towards point D, and point D is where there is a pedestrian gate and a stile, and the route then continues as public footpath 11. And you can see in red just marked on the side there, that's the part deletion, and that's where the legal line of public footpath 11 is. And this is just a quick look back towards point D where you can see the stile and the pedestrian gate. And this again, so you can see in yellow is the part addition, and you can see in red the part deletion towards point F, and that's where it goes directly through the gardens and the property. So this is the other side of the building, looking towards the building, and you can see point F is directly through the property, leading out towards point G, at the front garden, where it then meets point A, which is in line with the route to be added. So the report details all of the documentary evidence which we've inspected, and you'll have seen our comments on it. I'd just like to highlight that there was significant evidence that the route to be added at points A, B, C, D and E had existed for a very long time, and it was shown on the Ordnance Survey maps from as early as 1893 with the buildings in existence, and the route curved to the west of the properties. This was shown in the same way on the following 1911, 1931, 1956 and 1968 Ordnance Survey maps. The aerial photographs from 1940, 1960 and 2010 also show a substantial route to the west of the properties in situ. There was no way ever shown through the properties along E, F, G. So looking at the definitive map history, and this is where we believe the mapping error has occurred, is a hand-drawn process in the early 1950s. So the parish survey map distinctly drew the footpath 11 through the properties rather than the established route seen on the base map and the previous Ordnance Survey maps. and the survey card did not specify how the footpath went through the properties. It did, however, mention a style which, when looking at the ordnance survey maps, coincides with the boundary and the style in situ at point B. It is suggested that the map was drawn incorrectly and the card was correct. The draft map then went on to record the footpath to the west of the properties, as shown on the ordnance survey maps. It then joins the track to Valley Road. This was distinctively drawn around the properties in comparison to the previous parish survey, with no explanation as to the change. However, this supports the addition and deletion. Unfortunately, we did not have a copy of the provisional map, but the first definitive map was also drawn with a curve. However, the pen was very thick, as it was a hand-drawn process, so it appears to have skirted around the buildings, but due to the width of the pen stroke, it appeared to be too thick and places it through the building. The revised definitive map, which then became the definitive map, used a thinner pen than the previous map, but unfortunately places it directly through the property again. We believe that there was an error with the definitive map process and that the draft map was correct in recording the route to the west of the properties. This, along with the substantial ordnance survey evidence and the aerial photographs, lead us to recommend that an order be made to add section A, B, C, D, E around the properties and to delete section E, F, G through the properties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Celia will now give us a summary from Legal Services. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you. If committee turns to page 372, there were no points in favour of making the order and those against. Committee will not in support making an order for the addition of footpath between A and E. The footpath is running from line A to E on the ordnance survey map from 1893 to 1968. And point number 2, the footpath could not have been used as shown on the definitive map due to the existence of buildings. Point number 3, 1940 and 1960s aerial photograph shows the footpath to the west of the building. And point 4, the draft map shows the footpath curving to the west of the properties. Against making an order for the addition of the footpath between A and E, there's no particular evidence against. In support of making an order for the deletion of footpath E to G, there is lack of any historical and documentary evidence. This line is impossible to use because of the existence of buildings that have been in situ since at least 1893. An alternative route A to E is in existence. And finally, this line is not depicted on the ordnance survey map from 1893 to 1968. And against making an order for the deletion of footpath E to G is the initial presumption that it exists as it was recorded on the definitive map statement by due process. The conclusion for legal and democratic services is summarised on page 373. You can see the conclusion, and the summary is: it is suggested that the line shown on committee plan from point E to G is recorded as a public footpath in error, and the public footpath should be recorded between points A to E. To remove the footpath from a definitive map requires cogent evidence that it was put on the definitive map in error. So the line of the route to be deleted, which is A to G, was first shown on the parish survey map in the early 1950s. And the error therefore needs to be shown to be made in the preparation of this map. The committee is advised to first consider whether section A to E is already footpath and law and should be added to the definitive map, and then whether this means it's the correct route of footpath network in 1966 when the route was recorded on the definitive map along E to G, meaning that E to G should now be deleted from the record, from the definitive map record. Overall, the evidence supports the conclusion that a simple drafting error with regard to the recording of the exact line of the footpath resulted in the path being drawn on the definitive map along the line E to G instead of line A to E. So in conclusion, the committee is advised to approve the application and make an order that the route A to E subsists as a public footpath and should be added to the definitive map statement. The route to be deleted E to G did not exist on the ground in 1966 and was recorded in error and should therefore be deleted.
Thank you very much, Celia. Now open for questions or queries. No questions for the officers. Do we have a proposer for the officers' recommendation?
Move the recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Aldridge. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you very much, councillor Howarth. And who's in favour? Unanimous. Oh. Who's not in favour?
One councillor's left.
Pardon?
You one short because one councillor has left the meeting.
Yes, she had to leave early for another meeting. Councillor Cheetham is against. So. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I have not been informed of any urgent business. So we move on to item 14, and the next scheduled meeting will be held at 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 15th of September 2021 at 10:30 a.m. and thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.